one of the largest technology investors and operators in the world. So that was the Prime Minister meeting with Naspers Group Chairman and the CEO in Johannesburg on the margins of the G20 Summit. Right, joining us is Ambassador Gurjit Singh. Ambassador Singh is a former Indian envoy to Ethiopia, Djibouti and the African Union. He is also a former ambassador to Germany, Indonesia, Timor-Leste and the ASEAN. Ambassador, welcome to DD India News Hour. The first G20 summit on the African continent and the fourth consecutive G20 summit to be hosted by a global South country. High on symbolism, no doubt, but what will India be looking for in terms of substance or outcomes?
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Yes, it is the first on African soil, but it is the last of the 20 summits in the cycle. So next time around, I just hope that the summit in South Africa is not the last and it comes up earlier. The second part, what India would look for. I think India looks to sustain the momentum it had generated during its presidency in 2023, when it had brought the Global South, the Sustainable Development Goals, the just transition, all these important concepts to the fore. We are not looking only at a geo-economical outcome, but we are looking at a sustainable outcome for the world, which is today in turmoil. So I think what India did with the help of Indonesia first, then by itself, and then with Brazil as part of the Troika, and now with South Africa, is to sustain the Global South agenda, and this time there will be a special emphasis on Africa. We must make sure that every time there's a summit in Africa of any kind, Africa must get something out of it rather than be left twiddling his thumbs as on most occasions. So to make this summit sustainable and substantial, I think is India's game.
Ambassador Singh, as we speak, we are playing out those visuals of the meeting between India and Australia on the margins of the G20 summit. There we go. On the screens is PM Modi meeting his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese. Ambassador Singh, what do you make of this meeting? Also, are there any other bilateral that you would be keeping an eye out for particularly, and why?
So the first one I would watch out for is the one with the host, President Cyril Ramaphosa. And that I think will be something which will, take what I said earlier forward between the current president and a past president, Prime Minister Modi. The second one, I think, is the first meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, which I think will happen on 23rd. And that will complete the meetings, what I see now on your screen, with the Australian Prime Minister, and once he meets the Japanese Prime Minister, 3 of the Quad countries would have met over here. Then I think the IPSA summit is important because that has not happened for very long. And I'm glad that India, Brazil and South Africa at this important moment are picking up the baton to do that, so that the global agenda for the South, which IPSA had originally started around 25 years ago, can be added momentum to by IPSA, which, as you know, also is a part of BRICS. There are other people who are there. There is the Malaysian Prime Minister coming as ASEAN chair. Perhaps Prime Minister would meet him because Prime Minister did not go to Malaysia for the ASEAN summit. There is the Danish Prime Minister, the Denmark Prime Minister, who's now the chair of the European Union presidency. That could be another important meeting. And I think Canada is another one where Prime Minister Modi could perhaps use the occasion to meet for the first time. And then there are the old friends, France, Italy, and Germany, who I think could be important interlocutors at this time.
As you correctly mentioned, Ambassador, Prime Minister Modi would be meeting with his Japanese counterpart, Takaichi Sanai. He has just finished meeting with his Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese. So 3 of the 4 Quad members are present in South Africa. The notable absentee, therefore, is US President Trump. What do you make of his absence? Why is he absent from this year's G20 summit? Is it to do with some dispute with President Ramaphosa and his policies?
So the leading absentees at the level of leaders, besides President Trump, is President Putin,
Right.
President Xi, the President of Mexico, the President of Argentina, and most surprising, the President of Indonesia. We are counting him as one of the 4 leaders in succession who chaired the G20, and he's not coming. He's sending his vice president. Now, be that as it may, at least the countries are represented. In the case of the United States, they are leaving their seat vacant. So we don't even know who will accept the gavel on their part, because the United States is to start the next cycle of summits from 2026. And unless they participate, you cannot decide who the 2027 host will be, so the troika will remain incomplete. The significant part of the absence of the United States in totality is that their commitment to the agenda will remain suspect. And some of the issues relating to the global south, like debt stress, like trade, like SDGs, climate finance, the US doesn't subscribe to anymore. So under their presidency, what happens to the agenda that we have so clearly crafted over the last few years is a big question mark, and something that we must learn to strive to work together to prevent the United States from demolishing. The other part which worries me is the total absence of the United States opens up the area to China. Now, you know, in recent months, the Americans have not extended the AGOA, which was the African Growth and Opportunities Act, meaning no African country has any preferential trade access to the United States. Whereas at the same time, China has now announced that all African countries would have duty-free access to China. So this trade is being viewed differently.
Okay.
Secondly, critical minerals, which you are going to be discussing at the conference, is another area of contention. The Chinese have decided to fund the renovation of the railway from Zambia to Tanzania to the port on the Indian Ocean for the critical minerals, while the Americans are doing a DRC, Zambia, Angola, Lobito corridor to take the critical minerals to the Pacific Ocean. So I think this is something that India needs to be careful about, and we must find a way to engage with Africa without letting them into big power rivalry.
Fair enough. Ambassador, do stay on. I'll come back to you momentarily. In the meantime, let me pull up some more news coming to us from Johannesburg, where PM Modi has also met the members of the Naspers group in Johannesburg with Chairman Koos Bekker and Chief Executive Officer Fabrizio Bloisi. They met PM Modi on the margins of the G20 Summit in South Africa. Now, Naspers is a global consumer internet group and one of the largest technology investors and operators in the world. So those are the visuals of the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the chairman and CEO of the Naspers group that took place in Johannesburg on the margins of the G20 Summit. Right, coming back to you, Ambassador Singh. Now, we spoke about the absence of President Trump and the optics and likely outcomes from the summit. Looking at from an Indian perspective now, in terms of India's outreach to the African continent as a whole. Now, there's been some commentary in the Indian media and around the world as well about the lack of Indian emphasis on hosting the next edition of the India-Africa Forum Summit. Do you think it is long overdue? And if so, what can we expect going forward on that front?
It is indeed long overdue, by 5 years. But I don't think we are entirely at fault. I think the management on the African side and their preferences have also. But I think now there is good engagement from what I understand.
Okay.
Under the new Djiboutian former foreign minister who's the AU chairperson. And I think there would be a resolution to this very soon. But I think more than holding the summit, it is what should the agenda of engagement be? You know, it's 2015 when we had IFS 3. the world has changed a lot and Africa has changed a lot. So the old model of engagement that India had, that is not sustainable anymore. So the idea that we have given to the G20, I think those will need to be brought into a India-Africa uh, context and given an impetus. For instance, can we do more on climate change? Can we help Africa fight terrorism and radicalization? Can we help them more to build capacity in their youth? Can we work with them on the blue economy? Can we achieve SDGs through private sector impact investment? I mean, there are many ideas I can think of which are now current, but which were not part of the agenda in 2015. I mean, please look back. Even the Africa Continental FTA had not been announced in 2015, and it has come up. So that is there, the entire, CDC health agenda. So there is a large amount of functional agenda, which I believe is entirely within G20, including the DPI and other such things, which can be focused upon more specifically if India undertakes a three-tier engagement with Africa, putting the bulk of implementation bilaterally, but engaging regionally for regional projects and having a policy dialogue with the African Union so that India and Africa come together on the same page while pursuing the goals of the Global South.
Indeed. Now, talking about India's soft power ambassador in general and the diaspora in particular. Now, the Indian diaspora has emerged as a living bridge, as it were, uniting countries, governments, peoples and societies across continents. And the Indian diaspora in Africa is no different. What can you tell us about the diaspora in South Africa in particular? I mean, you've lived and served in Africa, in Ethiopia, in Djibouti, and also interacted with the African Union officials. What do you make of the role of the diaspora in Africa in general and South Africa in particular?
So the diaspora is of two kinds. One is the people who migrated centuries ago, like in South Africa, about 1 million people. And then there are people who have come as professionals in more recent years, in the last decade or last 15 years. So let's say in South Africa, there are 1.7 million diaspora, out of which I think 1.2 million would be in the multi-generational category and the rest would be first generation. And so they are the NRIs and the others are the PIOs. But as this lady who your colleague in Johannesburg interviewed, they are extremely grateful that the government of India has extended to the South African diaspora the right to have an OCI card up to 7 generations ago. When earlier it was only, I think, 2 or 3 generations. So that, I think, has really opened up a lot of engagement with the South African diaspora. Now, if you look at the diaspora in other countries, let's say Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, these are also multi-generational diaspora, but they are smaller, but economically more active. So with them, there is a lot of economic engagement and they can be the spearhead of further development of India-Africa economic partnership.
Absolutely. And finally, Ambassador, before we wrap up this conversation, people-to-people ties is an important pillar of any relationship. How has the perception of India changed in Africa over the years? Any lasting memories of your time spent on the continent?
I think the best memory African people have is of education and capacity building. People who go back after studying in India carry warm memory. And if we empower them to become entrepreneurs when they go back, they will become powerful interlocutors for Indian business.
And ambassadors as well.
Yes, absolutely, asset. And I remember that when I used to meet people in Ethiopia, for instance, who had been taught by Indian teachers, they would just look at me and say, Salam Babuji, because that is what they had been taught. So the respect that education and capacity building have brought and the bridge that it has built between India and Africa remains the most important element in my life, in my view, particularly because it shows that India believes that the best resources of Africa live upon it and do not lie under its ground.
Fascinating conversation indeed. Ambassador Singh, thank you for joining us and breaking it down for our viewers and putting the summit in its proper perspective and context for our viewers in India and around the world. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.